London, spring of 1818. The scent of beeswax candles and expensive perfume hung thick in the ballroom at Devonshire House, but beneath the glittering chandeliers and swirling silks, Lady Philippa Thornhill could barely breathe. At 23, Philippa had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of London society with practiced grace. Yet tonight, watching Lord Cornelius Ashcroft approach with calculated determination, she felt like a fox cornered by hounds. 4 wives he had buried in as many years, and now her father, drowning in £60,000 of debt to this very man, had promised her as the 5th. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and Philippa's hands trembled. Across the ballroom, her father caught her eye with a look that was part warning, part desperate plea. If stories of love that defy society's cruelest expectations move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. Lord Ashcroft reached her side with the predatory grace of a man who knew his prey could not escape. At 55, he carried himself with the arrogance of wealth and title, his silver hair pomaded to perfection, his evening clothes cut by the finest tailors on Savile Row. But his eyes, pale and calculating, held no warmth as they assessed her like a piece of particularly fine horseflesh. "Lady Philippa," he said, his voice carrying that peculiar quality of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, "you look exceptionally lovely this evening. The emerald silk suits your coloring admirably." "Lord Ashcroft." She curtsied with mechanical precision, her mind racing for escape routes that did not exist. "You are most kind. Your father and I have concluded our business arrangements." He took her hand without asking permission, his grip cool and possessive. "I believe congratulations are in order, my dear. The announcement shall appear in the Morning Post tomorrow. My lord, the wedding shall take place in 3 weeks' time at St. George's, Hanover Square," he continued, as though she had not spoken. "I have already procured the special license. No need for the reading of banns when one has the proper connections, eh?" Around them, conversations continued in elegant murmurs. The orchestra played. Couples twirled across the polished floor. No one noticed that Philippa's world was crumbling like sand beneath her feet. 3 weeks, she repeated faintly. "Indeed. I see no reason to delay once a decision has been made." His thumb traced a possessive circle on her gloved hand. "You shall find me a most attentive husband, my dear. My previous wives wanted for nothing in terms of jewels, gowns, and position, though they were, sadly, all of delicate constitution. I trust you are made of sturdier stock?" The thinly veiled threat hung between them like poison in the air. Philippa jerked her hand from his grasp, propriety forgotten in her sudden, overwhelming need to flee. "Forgive me, my lord. I feel quite faint. The heat." She did not wait for his response. Gathering her skirts, she pushed through the crowd with mounting desperation, ignoring the startled looks and whispered comments that followed in her wake. Behind her she heard Lord Ashcroft's voice, sharp with displeasure, calling her name. The cool night air of the terrace struck her face like a benediction. Philippa gripped the stone balustrade, gulping great breaths of air that tasted of freedom. Below her, Berkeley Square stretched dark and empty, lit by the flickering oil lanterns and the nascent glow of a few recently installed gas lamps near the thoroughfare, lights that tasted of coal fires and damp pavement. Running never solves anything, you know. Philippa whirled to find her younger brother Edward emerging from the shadows, his evening clothes rumpled, a glass of brandy dangling from his fingers. At 19, he had their father's height, but none of his hardness, his face still carrying traces of boyish softness despite his attempts at worldly sophistication. "You startled me," she said, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "Father sent me to fetch you back inside." Edward took a long drink, then made a face. "Ashcroft is furious. Half the ton witnessed your dramatic exit." "Let them witness," bitterness sharpened her voice. "Let them all see exactly what father has sold me for, £60,000 and the forgiveness of his gambling debts." Edward's expression crumpled. "Pippa, I'm sorry if I could do anything, but you cannot." She softened her tone, seeing his genuine distress. "None of us can. Father has signed the contracts, accepted Ashcroft's money. If I refuse, father faces debtor's prison. Mother's health would never survive the scandal." "Then what will you do?" Philippa stared out at the darkened square. her mind churning through increasingly desperate options. "I shall go to Aunt Josephine in Southwark, tomorrow before Father can stop me." "Southwark?" Edward's eyes widened. "That's practically the slums, Pippa. Aunt Josephine works with charity hospitals there. You cannot possibly—" "Can I not?" She turned to face him, her jaw set with determination that surprised them both. "Would you prefer I marry a man who has buried 4 wives in suspicious circumstances? I would rather live in poverty than die in luxury, Edward." Her brother opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, clearly wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he nodded. "Go tonight. I shall tell Father you retired with a headache. That should buy you a few hours head start at least." "Edward—" "Take Mother's pearls," he interrupted, pressing something into her hand. "I procured them for you. They should keep you in comfortable lodgings for a good while." Tears pricked Philippa's eyes as she closed her fingers around the cool strand of pearls. "Thank you. Just promise me one thing," Edward said quietly. "Write. Let me know you are safe. Father's wrath I can endure, but not knowing whether you are alive or dead would destroy me." She embraced him fiercely, feeling very much like she was saying goodbye to more than just her brother. "I promise." An hour later, dressed in her plainest traveling dress with her hair hidden beneath a simple bonnet, Philippa slipped from her father's townhouse on Grosvenor Square. She carried only a small valise containing a change of clothes, the pearls, and her mother's cherished, albeit well-read copy of Pride and Prejudice. Everything else, her fine gowns, her jewels, her position as the daughter of an earl, she left behind without a single backward glance. The hackney cab rattled through increasingly narrow streets as they travelled south across the Thames. Fashionable Mayfair gave way to the commercial bustle of the city, then to the cramped, smoke-stained buildings of Southwark. Here the street smelled of the river and unwashed humanity, of coal fires and rotting vegetables and lives lived too close together in too little space. Aunt Josephine's lodgings occupied the top floor of a narrow house near St. Thomas's Hospital. The building leaned at an alarming angle, as though it might collapse into its neighbour at any moment. Philippa climbed the dark stairway with growing trepidation, her kid boots slipping on stairs worn smooth by generations of feet. Her aunt answered the door in a worn wrapper, grey hair loose around her shoulders. At 52, Josephine Hartwell was her father's eldest sister, a spinster who had scandalized the family by taking up charity work among the poor. "Good Lord," Josephine's eyes widened. "Come in, child, quickly now." The small apartment was spotlessly clean but sparse. Books lined every available surface, medical texts mixed with novels and treatises on social reform. Philippa collapsed into the single chair, exhaustion overwhelming her now that she had reached safety. "Aunt Josephine, I need your help. Father has promised me to Lord Ashcroft. I will not marry that man." Her aunt's expression darkened. "Cornelius Ashcroft? The one whose wives keep dying?" "The very same." "Then you were wise to run." Josephine moved to the small stove, beginning to prepare tea with practiced efficiency. "Though your father will not take kindly to this defiance. The Earl of Thornhill is not a man who forgives easily." "I know." Philippa accepted the steaming cup gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warmth. "But I would rather face his anger than share Ashcroft's bed. There was something in his eyes tonight, Aunt Josephine, something cold and cruel and utterly void of human feeling. Men like Ashcroft see women as possessions, nothing more." Her aunt settled into the chair opposite, her own tea forgotten as she studied Philippa with shrewd eyes. "You may stay here as long as you need, though I warn you, life in Southwark bears little resemblance to Grosvenor Square. I have but one bed, which we shall share. The water must be fetched from the pump in the courtyard, and I expect you to earn your keep by assisting me at the hospital." "The hospital?" "St. Thomas's, just down the road. I volunteer there 3 days a week, helping with the charity patients. It is hard work, Philippa, and not for the faint of heart, but it is honest work, and no one will think to look for the daughter of an earl among the sick and dying poor." Philippa straightened her spine, ignoring the exhaustion that pulled at her limbs. "When do we begin?" A small smile curved Josephine's lips. "Tomorrow morning. But tonight you rest. You look as though you have been through quite an ordeal." That night, lying in the narrow bed beside her aunt, Listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Southwark filtering through the thin walls, Philippa wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Then she thought of Lord Ashcroft's cold eyes and possessive grip, and knew that whatever hardships lay ahead, they would be easier to bear than a lifetime shackled to that man. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of ballrooms and coffins, of her father's face twisted with rage, and of 4 pale women in wedding gowns, their dead eyes watching her with silent warning. The morning dawned grey and cold, London's perpetual fog rolling in from the Thames to blanket the city in damp misery. Philippa woke to find Josephine already dressed in a simple grey gown and sturdy boots, her hair scraped back in a severe bun. "Up with you, girl," her aunt said briskly. "Breakfast is bread and tea. We leave for the hospital in 20 minutes." St. Thomas's Hospital sprawled along the south bank of the Thames, smelling sharply of vinegar, stale air, and the pervasive scent of human suffering, a smell Philippa quickly learned to associate with the hospital's grim reality. Philippa followed her aunt through corridors lined with beds occupied by the sick and dying. "This is the surgical ward," Josephine explained, leading her to a large room where several doctors in blood-stained aprons moved between patients. One of the doctors looked up from examining a young boy's swollen leg. He was tall and lean, with dark blonde hair and grey-green eyes that held an intensity Philippa had never seen in any gentleman of her acquaintance. His hands moved with sure, gentle precision as he examined the child's injury. Philippa noted, despite the bloodstains on his apron, that the linen of his shirt and the quality of his coat, tossed carelessly over a nearby chair, suggested an origin quite distinct from the hospital's common staff. "Mrs. Hartwell," he called, his voice carrying a cultured accent at odds with his blood-stained appearance. "Would you fetch more clean bandages? This young man's leg is badly infected. I fear we may need to amputate to save his life." The boy whimpered, and the doctor laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. "There now, William, we shall do everything in our power to save your leg. But even if we cannot, you shall still have a life worth living. I promise you that." Josephine hurried away to fetch the bandages, leaving Philippa standing uncertainly in the doorway. The doctor glanced up, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. Despite her plain dress, she could not quite hide the marks of her upbringing. The straight posture, the elegant tilt of her head, the hands unscarred by manual labor. "You must be Mrs. Hartwell's niece," he said, rising to his feet with easy grace. "She mentioned you might be joining us. I am Mr. Sebastian Hartley." "Miss Thornhill," Philippa replied automatically, then cursed herself for the slip. Aunt Josephine had warned her to use a false name, but habits bred over 23 years died hard. If Mr. Hartley noticed the aristocratic surname, he gave no sign. "Welcome to St. Thomas's, Miss Thornhill. I hope you have a strong stomach. The work here is not for everyone." "I shall endeavor not to disgrace myself," she said, lifting her chin with a touch of her old hauteur. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or approval. Indeed. "Well then, would you be so kind as to hold young William's hand while I examine his leg more thoroughly? He is understandably frightened, and a gentle touch works wonders." For the next 3 hours, Philippa fetched water and bandages, held basins while wounds were cleaned, and offered what comfort she could to patients who looked at her with hollow eyes. By the time Josephine declared it was time for their midday meal, Philippa's back ached, and her dress bore several unfortunate stains. Yet she felt more alive than she had in months. Mr. Hartley joined them in the small room that served as the staff dining area, carrying a simple meal of bread, cheese, and weak tea. "Your niece shows promise, Mrs. Hartwell. She did not swoon once, even when young William's leg produced quite a spectacular amount of pus." "Thank you, Doctor," Philippa said dryly. "That is perhaps the most unusual compliment I have ever received." He grinned, and Philippa felt her breath catch. Without the stern concentration he wore while working, Mr. Hartley was extraordinarily handsome, his features sculpted with an elegance that would not have been out of place in a Mayfair drawing room. But there was a directness to his gaze, a lack of artifice that she had never encountered in any gentleman of the ton. "Tell me, Miss Thornhill," he said, breaking his bread into pieces, "what brings a gently bred young lady to the charity wards of Southwark? For you are gently bred. That much is evident despite your attempts to disguise it." Philippa's hands stilled on her teacup. Josephine shot her a warning glance, but it was too late. The question hung between them, demanding an answer. "I am here," Philippa said carefully, "because this is where my aunt needed help. And because sometimes, Doctor, remaining in gilded cages proves more dangerous than venturing into unknown territories." Mr. Hartley studied her with those penetrating grey-green eyes. "Running from something, then? Or someone? Is that not what you're doing as well?" The question emerged before she could stop it, but she had noticed the way he spoke, the cultured accent, the classical education evident in his casual references to Greek physicians and Roman medical texts. This was no ordinary surgeon trained through apprenticeship and observation. This was a man who had attended university, who moved in circles far above the charity wards of Southwark. Something shuddered in his expression. "We all have our reasons for the choices we make, Miss Thornhill. I find mine more comfortable when left unexamined." "As do I," she replied softly. Their eyes held for a moment too long, an understanding passing between them that needed no words. Then Josephine cleared her throat and the spell broke. "Well then," her aunt said briskly, "I believe we all have secrets we prefer to keep. Shall we return to work? Those bandages will not change themselves." Over the following weeks, a routine established itself. Philippa rose with the dawn, helped her aunt prepare their simple breakfast, then walked the short distance to St. Thomas's Hospital. She learned to clean wounds without flinching, to hold patients still during painful procedures, to offer words of comfort to those for whom comfort was all that remained. And every day, she found herself watching for Mr. Hartley with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. He was unlike any man she had ever known. Where the gentleman of the ton spoke in careful pleasantries and veiled insinuations, Sebastian, for so she had begun to think of him, spoke with brutal honesty. Where they valued fashion and position, he valued skill and compassion. Where they saw the poor as an unfortunate necessity to be ignored, he saw them as human beings, deserving of care and dignity. "You are staring again," Josephine murmured one afternoon as they prepared clean bandages in the supply room. Through the window, they could see Sebastian in the courtyard, deep in conversation with another physician. Philippa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was merely observing his technique. He has a remarkable way with patients." "Indeed. And I suppose it is merely his medical technique that causes your face to light up whenever he enters a room?" "Aunt Josephine," her aunt laughed, but then grew serious. "Be careful, child. Mr. Hartley is a good man, but he carries shadows of his own, and you are still promised to Lord Ashcroft, whether you ran from him or not. Your father will not simply accept your disappearance." "Father has not found me yet." "Yet," Josephine repeated meaningfully. "The Earl of Thornhill is a resourceful man when his interests are at stake, and you have cost him £60,000. He will not forgive that easily." Philippa knew her aunt spoke truth, but in the month since her arrival in Southwark, she had begun to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she might escape Lord Ashcroft's reach entirely. Surely even her father would eventually accept that she was lost to him, that forcing her return would create a scandal far worse than simply acknowledging his debts and facing the consequences. She was contemplating these thoughts one evening as she helped Sebastian clean instruments in the surgery. The hospital was quiet, most of the day staff having departed for their homes. Candles flickered on the workbench, casting dancing shadows across the gleaming scalpels and bone saws. "You have become quite proficient," Sebastian observed, examining a freshly cleaned blade. "Mrs. Hartwell tells me you have assisted with 3 amputations now, without showing any signs of distress." "I confess I find the work satisfying," Philippa admitted. "There is something honest about it, something real. So much of my former life was artifice and performance." "Former life?" He set down the scalpel, giving her his full attention. "You speak as though that existence has ended." "Perhaps it has." She met his gaze steadily. "Or perhaps I am merely in an intermission, waiting for the next act to begin." Sebastian moved closer, and Philippa became acutely aware of how alone they were, how improper this situation would be considered by anyone of her former acquaintance. Yet she found she did not care. The rules that had governed her life for 23 years suddenly seemed absurd when measured against the simple truth of this moment. "Miss Thornhill," he said quietly, "I find myself in an unusual position. I am not a man given to flowery speeches or romantic declarations. My life has been dedicated to medicine, to healing, to work that leaves little room for personal entanglements." Her heart began to beat faster. "I understand, Mr. Hartley. Do you?" He took another step forward, close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his grey-green eyes. "Because I am about to violate every principle of professional conduct I hold dear by confessing that over these past weeks, I have found myself thinking of you at the most inappropriate times. During surgery, while examining patients, in the middle of the night when sleep proves elusive." "Hartley," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, "I offer no grand house, Philippa." The formality had dropped entirely now, leaving only raw honesty between them. "Only the rooms above a surgery. You would leave silks for serviceable cotton, chandeliers for candlelight, and the security of your rank for the utter obscurity of my life. I am falling in love with you, and that is a reckless, selfish pursuit, because I have nothing but a life of honest work and my steadfast devotion to give you." Tears pricked Philippa's eyes. How strange that the first man to truly see her, to value her for herself, rather than her connections or dowry, believed himself inadequate. "What you offer is a life unchained, Sebastian. No gold is worth the price of a cage. I accept the simplicity if it means I keep my soul." His hand rose to cup her cheek, his surgeon's fingers gentle against her skin. "Then may I court you properly? With your aunt's permission, of course. I know this is all rather sudden." "Yes," she interrupted, laughing through her tears. "Yes to the courting, yes to—" The door burst open with a violence that sent them springing apart. Josephine stood in the doorway, her face pale with fear. "They have found you," she gasped. "Your father's men. They are at my lodgings now, demanding to know where you are. The landlady sent her boy to warn us." All the blood drained from Philippa's face. "But how does it matter?" Sebastian's voice had gone hard, his jaw set with determination. "They will search the hospital next. It is the logical place." "I could hide," Philippa began desperately. "Where?" Josephine shook her head. "St. Thomas's is too small, too open. They will find you within the hour." Sebastian gripped Philippa's shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "There is one way. It is unorthodox and presumptuous, but if you trust me, anything," she said without hesitation. "Marry me tonight, now. Once you are legally my wife, your father cannot force you to honor a previous betrothal. Lord Ashcroft's claim will be void." Josephine drew in a sharp breath. "Mr. Hartley, that is the only solution that does not end with Miss Thornhill bound to a man who has buried 4 wives under suspicious circumstances," Sebastian finished grimly. "Forgive my bluntness, Mrs. Hartwell, but we have perhaps 30 minutes before Lord Thornhill's men arrive at this hospital. I can procure a special license. I know the bishop. We were at Cambridge together. He owes me a favor." Philippa's mind reeled. Marriage, to a man she had known only 5 weeks, a hasty ceremony performed in secret, binding her life to his without courtship or proper engagement. Every rule of society screamed against such impulsive action. Yet what had society's rules brought her but misery and entrapment? "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I will marry you, Sebastian Hartley." The ceremony took place in the hospital's small chapel 90 minutes later. The bishop, a portly man with kind eyes and clever fingers, asked no questions beyond the legally required ones. Josephine stood as witness alongside Sebastian's colleague, Dr. Marcus Bennett, a gruff Scotsman who looked at Philippa with a combination of admiration and concern. "Do you, Philippa Louisa Thornhill, take this man?" "I do." "And do you, Sebastian?" "I do." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. When Sebastian slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, borrowed from the bishop's own wife, Philippa felt the chains of her former life finally snap. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Sebastian kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that held the promise of protection and partnership. When they pulled apart, Philippa saw her own mixture of wonder and terror reflected in his eyes. "We must leave London," he said urgently as they hurried from the chapel. "Your father's men will not stop simply because you are married, not until we can present them with legal proof and witnesses of good standing. Where will we go?" "To my family's estate in Yorkshire. Ravensmere Hall. It is remote, secure. You will be safe there." "Yorkshire?" Philippa's steps faltered. "Sebastian, you said you had no grand estate." "I said I was not wealthy," he corrected, avoiding her gaze. "And I am not, relatively speaking. Ravensmere is modest, comfortable. Nothing like what you are accustomed to, I am certain." Something in his tone made her uneasy, but there was no time to press for details. Already they could hear raised voices in the hospital's entrance hall, her father's men demanding to know if anyone had seen Lady Philippa Thornhill. They fled through the rear entrance like thieves in the night, Josephine pressing a small purse of coins into Philippa's hands with whispered blessings. A hired coach waited in the alley behind the hospital, arranged by Dr. Bennett with suspicious efficiency. As the coach rattled north through London's increasingly rural outskirts, Philippa sat beside the man who was now her husband and tried to make sense of the past few hours. She had entered the day as a fugitive spinster, dependent on her aunt's charity. She ended it as Mrs. Sebastian Hartley, bound to a man she barely knew, fleeing toward an uncertain future in the wilds of Yorkshire. "Are you frightened?" Sebastian asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the darkness of the coach. "Terrified," she admitted. "And yet, I do not regret it. Is that mad? If it is, then we are mad together." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I know this is not what you imagined for yourself. A hasty marriage to a hospital physician with more principles than pounds. But I swear to you, Philippa, I will protect you, with my last breath if necessary." "I know," she whispered. And somehow, despite everything, she did. The journey north took 3 days. They traveled in stages, stopping at coaching inns where Sebastian signed the register as Mr. and Mrs. Hartley. The inns were respectable but simple. Clean rooms and adequate meals, nothing more. On the third morning, as they approached Yorkshire, Sebastian grew increasingly quiet, staring out the window with an expression Philippa could not quite read. "You are troubled," she observed. He turned to her and she saw real fear in his eyes. "Philippa, there is something I must tell you. Something I should have told you before we married, but there was no time and I feared—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I feared you would refuse me if you knew the truth." Cold dread settled in her stomach. "What truth?" "I am not precisely who I claimed to be." Before he could elaborate, the coach crested a hill and Philippa's breath caught in her throat. In the valley below sprawled an enormous estate. Grey stone walls rose 3 stories high, punctuated by towers and turrets that spoke of medieval origins. The grounds stretched as far as the eye could see, encompassing formal gardens, parkland, and 3 separate lakes. "What is that?" Philippa asked faintly. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly as though gathering courage. "That is Ravensmere Hall, my family's estate." "Your family's—" She turned to stare at him, comprehension dawning with the force of a physical blow. "Sebastian, exactly how modest is your family?" "My father was the 4th Marquess of Ravensmere," he said in a rush. "He died 6 years ago, which makes me the 5th Marquess. I left for London shortly after his death and have been living under my own name, my family name, mind you, not a false one, working as a physician because I could not—" The coach rolled to a stop at the base of the hill. Through the window, Philippa could see a small army of servants streaming from the house, all in immaculate livery bearing a crest she now recognized as Sebastian's family arms. "You are a Marquis," she said slowly, testing the words. "You are one of the highest-ranking noblemen in England, and you let me believe you were a simple physician with modest means." "I am a simple physician," he protested, The title means nothing to me. I renounced it, refused to take my seat in Parliament, lived as I wished rather than as my rank dictated. I wanted to be judged for my skills and character, not for an accident of birth. An elderly butler appeared at the coach door, his face carefully neutral despite the shock that must be coursing through him at the unexpected return of his missing master, and the presence of an unknown bride. "Your Grace," the butler said, bowing deeply. "Welcome home. Lady Beatrice has been concerned by your extended absence." "Thank you, Grimsby." Sebastian descended from the coach, then turned to offer Philippa his hand. "May I present my wife, the Marchioness of Ravensmere?" The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marchioness. One of the highest-ranking ladies in all of England. Philippa, who had fled her father's house to escape an unwanted marriage, had inadvertently married into a position even higher than the one she had refused. She took Sebastian's hand because there was nothing else to do, allowing him to help her from the coach on legs that felt like water. The assembled servants stared at her with undisguised curiosity. This woman in a travel-stained dress, who had appeared from nowhere to claim a position that half the ambitious mamas of the ton had schemed to secure for their daughters. "Sebastian!" A woman in her 60s swept down the front steps with remarkable speed for someone of her age. She was elegantly dressed in dove-grey silk, her white hair arranged in a style 20 years out of fashion, but her eyes, grey-green like Sebastian's, snapped with intelligence and no small amount of displeasure. "Aunt Beatrice," Sebastian said, bowing to the woman. "May I present your wife, apparently?" Beatrice's gaze raked over Philippa with the precision of a battlefield general assessing enemy troops. "How delightful. One vanishes for 6 years without a word, then returns with a bride acquired God knows where, through God knows what circumstances. After our falling out when you took up that absurd physician's fancy, I naturally assumed you were lost to us forever. The gossips shall dine on this for months." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Lady Beatrice," Philippa managed, dropping into a curtsy that her governess would have approved, even if her current attire would not. "Is it?" Beatrice arched one imperious eyebrow. "We shall see. Come inside, both of you. Grimsby, have rooms prepared for her ladyship. And send word to the solicitor that my nephew has finally deigned to return and make his responsibilities impossible to ignore any longer." She swept back into the house, leaving Sebastian and Philippa standing in the courtyard, surrounded by servants, trying very hard to pretend they were not desperately interested in every word exchanged. "That went well," Sebastian muttered. "Sebastian." Philippa's voice emerged harder than she intended. "We need to speak. Privately. Now." He led her through a maze of corridors hung with portraits of disapproving ancestors, past rooms that spoke of wealth accumulated over centuries. The Ravensmere fortune clearly dwarfed anything Philippa's father had ever possessed. Finally, they entered what appeared to be his study, a book-lined room overlooking the West Gardens. The moment the door closed behind them, Philippa whirled to face him. "You lied to me." "I did not lie. You allowed me to believe you were a physician of modest means." Her voice shook with fury and something dangerously close to tears. "You let me think we would struggle together, building a simple life. You made me fall in love with a man who existed only in my imagination." "That man does exist," Sebastian insisted, reaching for her. "The title, the estate, the wealth, those are burdens I never wanted. What I told you about myself was true. I'm a physician. I care more about healing the sick than managing properties or attending Parliament. I simply neglected to mention the circumstances of my birth." "Neglected?" Philippa laughed bitterly. "You are a Marquis, Sebastian. That is not a detail one neglects to mention. It is rather like neglecting to mention that one has wings or can breathe underwater. Would you have married me if you had known?" The question emerged raw and desperate. "If I had told you in that hospital chapel that you would become the Marchioness of Ravensmere, with all the duties and scrutiny and expectations that entails, would you have said yes?" Philippa opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The honest answer was that she did not know. She had been running from exactly this sort of life, the suffocating expectations, the loss of autonomy, the reduction of her entire existence to a title and position. I thought not, Sebastian said quietly when she remained silent. And that is why I did not tell you. Because I wanted you to choose me, Sebastian Hartley, the man, not the Marquis of Ravensmere with his fortune and rank. I wanted to be loved for myself just once in my life, rather than for what I could provide. That is a luxury afforded only to those with wealth, Philippa shot back. Do you think the patients at St. Thomas's have the privilege of choosing love over security? Do you think my own father had that choice when he was drowning in £60,000 of debt? Your father made his choices long before debt forced his hand, Sebastian replied, his voice hardening. He chose gaming hells over fiscal responsibility. He chose to stake his daughter's happiness on the turn of a card. Do not ask me to pity him. I am not asking for your pity. Philippa's frustration boiled over. I am asking for honesty. Partnership requires truth, Sebastian, not secrets and half-revelations designed to manipulate. Is that what you think? He strode toward her, his expression fierce. That I manipulated you into marriage? You needed protection from a man who has buried 4 wives. I offered you that protection, knowing full well that revealing my title would only complicate an already desperate situation. Was that manipulation, or was it pragmatism? It was both, she said tiredly, the anger draining from her as quickly as it had come. And that is what makes it so difficult to know how I should feel about any of this. They stood facing each other in the fading afternoon light, 2 people bound together by circumstance and desperation, by genuine affection and monumental deception. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and uncertain futures. Finally, Sebastian spoke. I will not force you to remain here if you truly wish to leave. Our marriage was hasty and born of necessity. If you want an annulment— And go where? Philippa interrupted. Back to my father. To Lord Ashcroft? Sebastian, you may have deceived me about your circumstances, but you were right about one thing. I needed protection. I still need protection. Lord Ashcroft will not simply accept that I married another man. My father will demand I return, claim coercion or madness or whatever excuse allows him to preserve his arrangement with Ashcroft. They cannot force an annulment if the marriage has been consummated, Sebastian said carefully. Heat flooded Philippa's cheeks. In the chaos of their flight and the shock of arriving at Ravensmere, she had not fully considered that aspect of their marriage. They were legally wed, but had not yet. I am not suggesting we rush into intimacy, Sebastian added quickly, reading her expression. Only that we consider our options pragmatically. If you wish to remain married to me, if you believe we might build something real despite this unfortunate beginning, then we can present a united front to your father and Ashcroft. But if you cannot forgive my deception, if the thought of living as my wife fills you with revulsion, then I will help you find another solution. Philippa moved to the window, staring out at the manicured gardens that stretched toward the distant moors. Somewhere out there, her father was likely planning his next move. Lord Ashcroft was calculating how to reclaim his promised bride, and here she stood, accidentally married to a Marquis who genuinely seemed to care for her, in a home that made her father's townhouse look like a gamekeeper's cottage. Tell me why you left, she said without turning around. Why you abandoned this— she gestured at the opulent room— to work in a charity hospital in Suffolk. Make me understand. Sebastian came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not so close as to crowd her. My father was a tyrant, he said quietly. Brilliant, successful, utterly convinced that rank and position were the only measures of a man's worth. He intended for me to follow in his footsteps, take my seat in Parliament, manage the estates with ruthless efficiency, marry some suitable heiress to produce heirs, and never question the natural order that placed us at the top of society's hierarchy. And you disagreed. I wanted to heal people. His voice carried a thread of old pain. From the time I was a boy, I was fascinated by medicine, by the human body, by the ways we could alleviate suffering. But father saw physicians as tradesmen, beneath the dignity of a Marquis. He considered the healing arts merely one step above a common trade, a profession suitable for second sons or the impoverished, never for a Marquis with a duty to the crown and to his own social standing. He forbade me from pursuing it. Yet you did. I attended Cambridge and studied medicine in secret, under my mother's maiden name. Father discovered it eventually, of course. We had a terrible row. He threatened to disinherit me, but he could not. The title and estates are entailed. So instead he told me I could pursue my physician's fancy as an officer in the Army Medical Department. Noble service, you see, saving officers and gentlemen rather than common soldiers. Acceptable for a second son, perhaps, but hardly appropriate for an heir. But you did not join the army. I tried, but Father died unexpectedly. His heart, the physicians said, before I could complete my commission. And suddenly I was the 5th Marquis, with estates and tenants and responsibilities I had never wanted. So I ran. I took my mother's maiden name, Hartley, and went to London to work in the charity hospitals as I had always dreamed. For 6 years, I have been free. And now I am here with a wife with responsibilities I can no longer ignore. Because as much as I despise the trappings of rank, I cannot in good conscience continue to neglect the hundreds of people who depend on this estate for their livelihoods. Philippa absorbed this, understanding more than she wanted to. They were not so different, she and Sebastian. Both had run from lives mapped out by others. Both had sought freedom in anonymity, and both had found themselves drawn back into the world they had tried to escape. I cannot forgive you immediately, she said finally, but I can try to understand, and I can admit that despite your deception, I still care for the man I came to know in that hospital, the man who treats the poor with the same respect he would show a duke, the man who uses his surgeon's hands to ease suffering rather than to accumulate wealth. Sebastian released a breath he seemed to have been holding. That is more than I deserve. Yes, it is. She turned to face him fully. So here is what we shall do. You will give me time to adjust to this new reality. You will be honest with me about everything. Your past, your responsibilities, your expectations of me as your wife. And in return, I will do my best to fulfill the role I apparently agreed to when I said I do in that chapel. And if your father comes demanding an annulment, then we present a united front. Philippa straightened her spine, calling on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. I may have accidentally married a Marquis, but I did so of my own free will. Lord Ashcroft has no claim on me, and my father... Her voice hardened. My father lost the right to dictate my future when he tried to sell me to a monster. Sebastian's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. You are extraordinary, do you know that? Most women would be in hysterics after discovering they had accidentally married into one of the highest-ranking families in England. Oh, I shall likely have hysterics later, Philippa assured him. But for now, I prefer pragmatism. After all, I have already fled one unwanted marriage, learned to clean suppurating wounds without fainting, and married a complete stranger in a hospital chapel. Becoming a marchioness seems almost anticlimactic by comparison. He laughed, a genuine sound of relief and affection. May I kiss my wife? Philippa considered this. Despite her anger and confusion, she found she wanted him to. You may. This kiss was different from the brief press of lips in the chapel. This kiss held promise and apology, desire and regret, hope and uncertainty all tangled together. When they finally pulled apart, Philippa was breathless. We shall make the best of this strange situation, she declared. Together. Together, Sebastian agreed. A sharp knock interrupted what might have been another kiss. Grimsby's voice came through the door with practiced neutrality. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but the Earl of Thornhill and Lord Ashcroft have arrived at the gates demanding entrance. Lady Beatrice thought you should be informed immediately. Philippa's blood ran cold. They found us. Of course they did. Sebastian's jaw set with determination. Your father is nothing if not resourceful. But they are too late, Philippa. You are my wife now, legally and irrevocably. Let us go down and make that abundantly clear. The confrontation took place in Ravensmere's grand entrance hall. Philippa stood beside Sebastian on the upper landing, looking down at her father and Lord Ashcroft, both travel-stained and furious. Philippa! The Earl of Thornhill's voice echoed off marble walls. Come down here at once. I'm afraid I cannot, father. Philippa's voice emerged steady. I am no longer under your authority. Allow me to present my husband, Sebastian Hartley, The Marquis of Ravensmere. Her father's face went purple, then white as Grimsby confirmed Sebastian's identity. The Marquis of Ravensmere. The very same, Sebastian said coolly, descending the stairs with Philippa on his arm. I believe you attempted to engage my wife to Lord Ashcroft before our marriage. That arrangement is now void. Lord Ashcroft stepped forward, his pale eyes glittering with malice. This is obviously a conspiracy. The girl was under duress. I demand the marriage be annulled immediately. On what grounds? Sebastian inquired mildly. My wife entered into our union willingly, with proper witnesses and clerical authority. The marriage has been registered with all appropriate authorities. There are no grounds whatsoever for annulment. She was promised to me. Ashcroft's veneer of civility cracked. Her father accepted £60,000 for her hand. I have legal contracts, which were signed before her marriage to another man. Sebastian's voice carried the weight of unassailable legal authority. My Lord Ashcroft, I believe you are under the unfortunate misconception that you hold a prior claim on the person of the Marchioness of Ravensmere. Under the sanctity of the Church and English law, however, that particular engagement is void. The doctrine of feme covert renders any such contracts null upon her marriage. I trust your solicitor will explain the finer points of coverture law to you upon your return to town. The possessive language made Philippa wince, but she understood its necessity. This was the language these men understood: property rights and legal ownership. Any appeal to affection or personal choice would fall on deaf ears. Her father seemed to recover some of his composure. Philippa, be reasonable. You have known this man barely a month. You cannot possibly— I have known Lord Ashcroft even less, yet you had no qualms about binding me to him for life. Philippa kept her voice level through sheer force of will. At least I chose my own husband. You chose poverty and obscurity, her father shouted. I was trying to secure your future. You were securing your gambling debts, Philippa interrupted coldly. Do not pretend this was ever about my welfare. You sold me to the highest bidder without any regard for my safety or happiness. How dare you speak to me thus? I dare because I am no longer your dependent daughter, but the Marchioness of Ravensmere. The title still felt strange on her tongue, but she wielded it like a weapon. And you, father, are a guest in my home, a guest who is perilously close to wearing out his welcome. Sebastian placed a warning hand on her arm, then addressed both men with Arctic courtesy. Gentlemen, I believe this matter is concluded. Lady Philippa is now my wife and under my protection. As for your debt, Lord Thornhill, I am prepared to pay the £60,000 you owe Lord Ashcroft, plus an additional £10,000 in compensation for his disappointment. That seems more than generous under the circumstances. Lord Ashcroft's face contorted with rage. You think you can simply buy— I am not buying anything, Sebastian cut him off. I am resolving a debt that is preventing an amicable end to this unfortunate situation. Take the money, Lord Ashcroft. You will find no other resolution that leaves you in such a favorable position. The two older men exchanged glances. Philippa could see the calculations running behind their eyes, the loss of their scheme versus the substantial sum Sebastian offered, the scandal of fighting a marquis versus the pragmatic benefits of accepting his terms. 75,000, Lord Ashcroft said finally, plus your written assurance that you will not pursue legal action regarding the broken contract. Done. Sebastian's voice held contempt, barely concealed behind courtesy. My solicitor will draw up the appropriate documents. Now, unless there is other business to discuss, I believe we all have matters requiring our attention. It was a dismissal, clear and absolute. The Earl of Thornhill opened his mouth as if to protest, then seemed to think better of it. He had come hoping to reclaim his daughter and salvage his arrangement with Ashcroft. Instead, he was leaving with a fortune and an alliance, however tenuous, with one of England's most powerful families. It was not what he had wanted, but it was far from a complete loss. Very well, he said stiffly, but Philippa— Lady Ravensmere, she corrected, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. Her father's expression flickered with something that might have been regret, or might simply have been calculation. Lady Ravensmere, then, I trust you know what you are doing. For the first time in my life, father, I believe I do. After they departed, Philippa found her legs would no longer support her. Sebastian caught her as she swayed, guiding her to a bench in the entrance hall. "That was intense," she managed. "You were magnificent." He crouched before her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "The way you stood up to your father, I have never seen anything like it." "I was terrified." Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You, my dear wife, are the bravest person I have ever known." Lady Beatrice appeared from whatever alcove she had been observing from, her expression thoughtful. "Well, that certainly was entertaining, though I do wish you had given me more warning about acquiring a niece, Sebastian. I might have prepared something other than cold suspicion as a welcome." "Forgive me, Aunt. Events moved rather quickly." "So I gather." Beatrice studied Philippa with sharp eyes. "For you are the Earl of Thornhill's daughter. I remember your presentation at court 3 years ago. You created quite a stir by accidentally tripping the Duchess of Devonshire." Despite everything, Philippa felt a smile tug at her lips. "That was not entirely accidental. The Duchess had just made a particularly cruel remark about my mother's declining health." Beatrice's expression softened fractionally. "I see. Well then, perhaps you shall fit into this family after all." "We Hartleys have never been particularly good at following society's dictates." She extended her hand. "Welcome to Ravensmere, Philippa. I suspect life here will be anything but dull." Over the following weeks, Philippa began to understand the truth of Lady Beatrice's words. Life as the Marchioness of Ravensmere bore little resemblance to anything she had known before. The estate sprawled across 15,000 acres, encompassing villages, farms, and moorland. Hundreds of families depended on Ravensmere for their livelihoods. The house contained 63 rooms, each more opulent than the last. Yet Sebastian spent his days learning about matters he had ignored for 6 years: tenant disputes, drainage problems, boundary issues. His evenings found him in the village surgery, treating anyone who appeared free of charge. Philippa accompanied him whenever possible, falling back into the rhythm they had established at St. Thomas's. Here in the simple surgery with its familiar smells of vinegar and clean linens, they were simply Sebastian and Philippa, partners in work that mattered. "You know," she said one evening as they cleaned instruments after setting a farmer's broken arm, "I think I understand now why you ran from all this. Do you? The weight of expectation, the way every action is scrutinized, judged against standards set by dead ancestors. It is suffocating." Sebastian set down the scalpel he had been polishing. "And yet you bear it with remarkable grace. Only because I know it matters to you." She met his eyes across the workbench. "You may have wished to escape your responsibilities, but I can see how much you care about the people who depend on you. The tenants speak of your father with respect but fear. They speak of you with something far warmer. Hope, perhaps. They believe you will be different. I am trying." He moved around the bench to stand before her. "These past weeks, watching you navigate situations I was too cowardly to face, managing the household, corresponding with neighbors, attending to estate business, I am humbled by your strength." "I had excellent training in being decorative and useless," Philippa said wryly. "I am merely directing my attention from frivolous ornamentation to necessary service. The two are not, perhaps, entirely separate." "You have never been useless." Sebastian took her hands, his expression serious. "Philippa, I know we married under unusual circumstances. I know I deceived you and that you are still, rightfully, angry about that deception. But I want you to know that I meant what I said in London. I am falling in love with you, perhaps have already fallen, and if you can find it in yourself to forgive me, I should like very much to build a real marriage with you. Not one of convenience or necessity, but one of genuine partnership and affection." Philippa's heart beat faster. "Sebastian, you need not answer now," he interrupted gently. "Take whatever time you need. I am not going anywhere, and neither are you. We have the rest of our lives to sort this out." But Philippa found she did not want to wait. Over these weeks at Ravensmere, she had watched her husband transform from the guilt-ridden fugitive she had met in London to a man beginning to accept his responsibilities while maintaining his principles. He paid his tenants fair wages and refused to evict families fallen on hard times. He modernized farming techniques and established a school for estate children. He worked tirelessly in his surgery, treating rich and poor with equal care. This was the man she had fallen in love with, not the Marquis of Ravensmere with his ancient title and vast fortune, but Sebastian Hartley, who healed the sick and fought against injustice in whatever small ways he could. "I do not need more time," she said softly. "I need only this, your honesty, your partnership, your genuine affection. Everything else we can navigate together." Sebastian's expression transformed with joy and relief. "Together," he agreed, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. They were interrupted, as they perpetually seemed to be at crucial moments, by Lady Beatrice clearing her throat in the doorway. But this time, Philippa noticed, her husband's aunt was smiling. "Forgive the intrusion, but there is a matter requiring your attention. It seems the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire have arrived unexpectedly, along with half the local gentry. Word of your marriage has spread, and they are all desperately curious to meet the new Marchioness." Philippa groaned. "Must we?" "I am afraid we must," Sebastian said, though he looked no more enthusiastic than she felt. "Society's obligations come with the title, much as I wish otherwise." "Then let us face them together," Philippa declared, taking his arm. "After all, I already tripped the Duchess once. How much worse could a second encounter be?" The dinner that followed proved less daunting than Philippa had feared. The local gentry were curious but kind, more interested in gossip than judgment. If they found it peculiar that the new Marchioness had married so hastily, well, the Hartleys had always been eccentric. As the weeks turned to months, Philippa and Sebastian fell into a rhythm that suited them both. They managed the estate together, worked side by side in the surgery, and slowly built the intimacy that had been missing from their hasty marriage. No dramatic declarations marked this progression, only small moments of trust and affection, of choosing each other again and again. 6 months after their arrival at Ravensmere, Philippa stood in the same study where she had confronted Sebastian about his deception. Outside, winter was settling over Yorkshire, painting the moors white and driving the estate workers to their hearths. Inside, a fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with medical texts and estate ledgers. Sebastian found her there, drawn as always to wherever she happened to be. "Deep thoughts?" "I was remembering the day we arrived," she admitted. "How furious I was, how betrayed I felt. And now?" Sebastian pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "I love you, Philippa Hartley, not because you are the Marchioness of Ravensmere, though you excel at that role. Not because you were a convenient solution to an impossible problem, though you were certainly that, but because you are brave and brilliant and stubborn enough to see past the worst of my flaws to the man I am trying to become." "I love you too," she whispered. "All of you, the physician and the Marquis, the fugitive and the landowner, the man who ran and the man who stayed." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, bound by necessity but choosing each other through love. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing Ravensmere in white. But inside, wrapped in her husband's arms, Philippa felt only the quiet, profound warmth of a life earned, not given. Dear listener, sometimes the greatest loves begin with the greatest deceptions, not malicious lies meant to harm, but truths withheld from fear and desperation. Like Philippa, you may have faced moments where circumstances forced impossible choices, where the path forward seemed obscured by secrets and half-truths. But remember this: honesty, though painful, builds foundations that withstand any storm. Partnership requires vulnerability, the courage to reveal not just our triumphs but our failures, our fears, our complicated truths. Philippa could have demanded an annulment when she discovered Sebastian's deception. Instead, she chose to understand the man behind the title, to see his fear of being loved for his rank rather than his character. In your own relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, strive for that same balance: compassion for human weakness paired with insistence on eventual truth. We all carry secrets, all make choices born of fear. What matters is not perfection, but the willingness to be honest when it matters most and the grace to forgive when others do the same. Tonight, as you rest, remember that you are worthy of love that sees past surfaces to the person beneath, not your title or position or wealth, but the beating heart of who you truly are. And in turn, may you offer that same depth of vision to those you love. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If Philippa and Sebastian's story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and unexpected happy endings that defy all expectations.